was the days when super salesmen got out there and sold systems. So often as not, they wrote the software themselves. And we decided that these computer companies really need some packaged software. Our theme was to alight upon things that would be difficult for others to do.
For those people watching now that actually they weren't around in that time, this is pre-computers, 70s, 80s, early 80s. What was it like to actually be in business without computers?
Well, I don't know if I've even got much knowledge of that. They had curious machines called sensormatics and strange mechanical electrical devices from companies like National Cash Register and Burroughs. And IBM ruled the mainframe world.
So computers were around, but they weren't necessarily something that every business owned, and certainly not every consumer. You could get access to them, but only for particular use cases where it was worth a considerable spend to invest.
In the mid-70s, I remember, I could tell you where they all were. Watties had one, the Hawke's Bay Meat Company had one, and that was a Burroughs computer. There was an NCR machine at Rothman's Tobacco, and there was an IBM System 3 out at the Fert Works. Those were the only machines that had programmers.
So a handful of computers in Hawke's Bay, and you were working on one of those at the time?
I was working at Watties on their IBM mainframe. No, that was into the mid-70s, and before we formed the company, my brother and several other people who are still working with us were selling computers for Burroughs Corporation. The bulk of electricity companies and local authorities had small sort of they called them mini computers, but there was nothing mini about them. They were hardly computers, but they were. And it was the days when super salesmen got out there and sold systems and looked around and tried to find some software. So often as not, they wrote the software themselves. A very strange environment. And about that stage, I became interested in that, and that's when we decided that these computer companies really need some packaged software.
So the hardware part that's the first way in, is a company wants to buy some computer hardware, and software is really an afterthought to be able to just sell hardware in. What attracted you to the software side of it rather than just sell computers?
Probably a fairly modest university career, although my brother's had a fairly advanced mathematics career, and he became an actuary for a while. And then we decided that computers looked like quite a good thing to do. And the first thing we observed was there was no packaged software, and it was being handcrafted virtually every time a computer was sold. You don't see things like MYOB and Xero and those sorts of things, which everyone takes for granted now. But I believe that we produced the first set of packaged software for debtors, creditors, payroll, general ledger, and sold that multiple times around the country.
And so this is financial software that actually makes those computers more valuable, because now they can do something not just on their own, but they'll be expected to work a certain way in more than one business. Between yourself and Pat and John, what were the skills that you all brought to it back then?
Well, John was initially a very successful salesman with Burroughs. But we really did most of the initial software, right? Most of the software with another couple of guys who are old associates from our school days. Pat came along somewhat later. He had been involved in software somewhere else, but that's not his real strength. His real strength was getting out there and doing the sales. We decided to hit on two markets that had some complexity in them that we thought would be difficult for others to approach. And one of them is local authorities. Local authorities have got about 35 different things they do. Not only rates and water, but they also got car parks and building permits and whatnot, dog licensing, that sort of stuff. They do many different things, and it's quite hard to get all that stuff together, combined into a comprehensive package. And then electricity billing has proved to be notoriously difficult for people to develop, and we developed that. At one stage we had, I think, 15 power companies in New Zealand, so our customers were sending out power bills to, I think, 23% of the population.
Wow.
Our theme was to really alight upon things that would be difficult for others to do, and so it proved.
So that almost flies in the face sometimes of looking for low-hanging fruit. You actually were attracted to things that were going to be complex to develop, difficult or almost impossible within certain industries like energy, where, at least in your view, no one had managed to convert kilowatts to bills at scale that were accurate.
That's right, and there are complex problems. We did the first time of use metering actually at Waikato Electricity. I developed that.
The first user...
Yeah, the first time of use billing that was done. It's now quite common.
Who then opened up the international side of the sales for what is MAGIQ Software today, Jim?
For our American partners, we'd done all that work, that really hard work of getting electricity billing running smoothly. We'd done all those sorts of things, and then we thought, well, our reporting and budgeting is not good enough. So we started reselling some software from Australia, but we noticed that was missing a few things too. Some of the things that we already had, like the long-term financial planning and quite intricate stuff. So in the end, we thought the best thing to do was to buy that company. The big thing we noticed was their culture was pretty much the same as ours. I mean, New Zealand companies going into Australia don't always have a wonderful track record, but we found a really good fit over there. And so once we were there, we immediately had 300 odd customers in Australia, and we then set about incorporating our long-term planning and our cloud technology into that product, and that is the product that we've taken to the States. One thing I should mention is we actually started the first commercial internet service in New Zealand, and that was a company called Internet ProLink, and that was right at the birth. In the beginning there were a few internet services out of the universities, but we were the first ones to produce proper bills and do proper accounting and slash the prices for international traffic. The traditional price was $10 a megabyte for international traffic.
I don't remember it being that high, but I do remember at university it was $2 a megabyte, and you had to be very selective. And if you could find an image online, that was an interesting thing. What does it take to get talent to come to Napier and work for MAGIQ Software?
Well, I tell you what, I really like the local EIT. We're getting just wonderful young graduates. We've got a young guy, Freddie Stoddart. I don't know if you know, there's a Stoddart Road down out of Waipukurau. He's from a farming family, and he went to the EIT here, but he's now our AWS expert in Melbourne. When they want to go and seek their fortune in a big city overseas, well, we don't lose them, we send them to Melbourne. Yeah, I mean, this comes back to what we've done with buildings and the whole environment. It's a really attractive place now. My brother Pat has been in charge of the buildings. I think we have. In the beginning, we just wanted to provide a nice environment for our staff, but and that was in the middle of the 80s. And then there was a guy called Robert McGregor here, who was in charge of the Art Deco Trust and was concerned about the destruction of various Art Deco buildings, and we thought, oh, what's he going on about? So we took an interest in it and started looking after them, and we thought there might be a good business case for saving these, and this building here is a classic one. It's got a wonderful mixture of small offices out here.
It's quite an undertaking to acquire old buildings and renovate, because of the investment versus building new can sometimes be far more for far less square metres. And I think one of the interesting things about Napier, having come from this region, knowing the Art Deco story is that because of the time of Art Deco in the 1930s, there actually very little building going on because it was right after the Great Depression, and there was only really Miami and Napier from an earthquake outside of big commercial buildings like the Empire State. There's very little Art Deco around the world, and that's what makes this such a special example.
Yeah, and the remarkable thing was that they rebuilt Napier in, about 5 years. And they didn't have the big machines, didn't have the technology they have today. And if you compare that with the recovery of Christchurch, for example, they did a remarkable job. And Art Deco in itself is not necessarily very wonderful architecture, but it's all the ornate, the intricacies and the sameness. That's when you travel around New Zealand, a lot of the sort of mid-sized cities are perhaps not that interesting. Napier's got something special, and we're quite proud of what we've done here.
And now recently you joined the New Zealand Code group of New Zealand software services. What was the thinking behind getting the KIWI trademark on your software services?
We're pretty proud of our, where we come from, and we think the environment here is great. New Zealand's got such a good sort of presence in the international world at the moment, particularly over COVID and things. It's a good label to have.
Well, thank you for your contribution to Napier, but also thank you for your sharing about MAGIQ Software that's based here, that also has offices in Australia. It's not often seen what happens with businesses that are software driven, because it's not as physical as something that might be manufacturing goods. And I think it's important to share these stories, because as more and more is done in software, these are more important to the future of New Zealand. And thank you for becoming a New Zealand Code license holder as a business. It's great to be able to support and lead on what you're doing.
Thank you. And I think it's important to recognise where you come from and contribute.
Well, thank you for your time today, Jim.
Thank you.
And for being on a KIWI Original. Thank you for watching this episode of a KIWI Original. If you like what you saw, then hit the subscribe button and you'll get other episodes just like this one in your inbox. Make sure you hit the bell too for notifications, and you'll be served up uniquely KIWI stories like this one, contributing to New Zealand's future.